This city was once the jewel of our kingdom, a place of light and beauty and music, and so it shall be once more!
Here's up, viewers. Like, well, everything designed by Tolkien, Osgiliath has a rich history. Its name means Citadel of the Stars in Sindarin. But not many people seem to know that even before its capture during the War of the Ring, it was in disrepair. And today we'll be talking about how one of Gondor's greatest cities descended into ruin. Founded near the end of the Second Age by Isildur and Anarion, it was the centre for trade and the original capital of Gondor for over 1500 years, both culturally and politically. So much so that in Minas Ithil was the house of Isildur, and Minas Anor the house of Anarion. They shared the realm between them, and their thrones were set side by side in the Great Hall of Osgiliath. But it was also where the Chief Palantir, the largest and most powerful of the Seeing Stones, like the one that you see Saruman has in Orthanc, it was kept in Osgiliath. It straddled the River Anduin, connecting the eastern and western realms of Gondor with a great bridge. And this bridge was actually a relatively important symbol for Osgiliath, as you'll learn as we talk about its downfall. But the decline of Osgiliath isn't just a story of being destroyed in war, it's a story of decline in the cultural, political, and military sphere until it's left the ruin that we find it during the War of the Ring. See, its decline truly began during the Gondorian Civil War, known as the Kinstrife, when the true-born son of the king, Eldacar, ascended to the throne. Believing that Eldacar did not truly deserve the throne, many of the ancient houses of Gondor, led by a man of the name of Castamere, usurped the throne. It was the year 1437 of the Third Age when Eldacar was besieged on Osgiliath, and he held it long, until hunger and the greater forces of the rebels drove him out, leaving the city in flames. But let's just talk about what this siege meant for Osgiliath as a city. Because historically, coming under siege can often change a city. They will often poison the water supply, they'll burn the crop fields around the city, and as they said, they starved them out. This radical change to the environment can force peasants to leave to find workable land and drinkable water. They rely on the environment and the landscape around the city to survive. It's not like they're the ruling class who can have things brought to them. And it was actually following this event, this siege, that the population of Osgiliath began to decrease. But more than that, the Kinstrife actually led to the physical destruction of parts of Osgiliath, as it's written that the slaughter and destruction done in the city at Castamere's bidding far exceeded the needs of the war. In other words, much of the population may have been killed and many of its buildings may have been razed to the ground. And rebuilding an ancient city, which was mostly made of like stone, is not an easy effort. But not only that, the Civil War actually saw Osgiliath lose something else, something perhaps more precious. In that siege and burning, the Tower of the Stone of Osgiliath was destroyed, and the Palantir was lost in the waters. Now, there are a myriad of reasons for the significance of losing their Palantir. The Palantiri were symbols of royal, political, social stature throughout history. They were distributed to those trusted with leadership and foresight. You can see the importance of the Palantir and this tower that it was kept in where it was built, and its architecture. It was built on top of the Dome of Stars, in other words, the Great Hall of Osgiliath, where the two thrones were kept. That's how important it was. They built it over their Great Hall. The Tower of the Stone and the Palantir were important cultural icons to Osgiliath, but also to kind of the greater Gondorian kingdom itself. So that was the Kinstrife, the Gondorian Civil War, and it saw Osgiliath lose population, economy, and cultural heritage, and from that it can be very difficult to rebuild. But its further decline came in the year 1636 of the Third Age, with the arrival of the Great Plague, a deadly sickness akin to the Black Plague. Sweeping out of the east, Osgiliath was the first city in its way to be struck, and it was struck hard, along with the rest of Gondor. Soon after, a deadly plague came with dark winds out of the east. The king and all his children died, and great numbers of the people of Gondor, especially those that lived in Osgiliath. And the appendices further elaborates in telling us that Osgiliath was now partly deserted, and then began to fall into ruin. Few of those who had fled from the plague into Ithilien or to the Western Dales were willing to return. The Great Plague truly devastated Osgiliath. On one front, the books imply that the city may have lost up to half of its population, and that alone is enough to see a city fall into ruin. I mean, if you look throughout history, cities that lose that much of their population just die. With nobody around to keep it, guard it, or really occupy it, it turns into a place for people to squat and loot, and during the Great Plague, many wealthy families would have left a lot behind for people to take and steal. Gradually, much of the outer city would have descended into poverty, as only parts of it, probably around the River Anduin as a fresh water source, would have been occupied. And on another front, it virtually wiped out a huge part of the royal family, King Telumnar and his children. The throne then passed on to his nephew, a man by the name of Tarandor, and I do want to talk about this for the moment, because changing who's in power, who they expect the royal family to be, can affect a city intimately. The king was replaced with someone that most common people at the time wouldn't have known, a son of the brother of the king. In feudal societies like these, the common people are already distanced from the ruling class, and sort of having this further abstraction would just distance them even more. It would lose political capital amongst the common people. They wouldn't have the same faith or loyalty to the ruling body, to the king. Finally, in the year 1640 of the Third Age, just 4 years after the Great Plague, Osgiliath really lost all political stature that it had. In the wake of the Great Plague, following the mass desertion, the shake-up of the political powers that be, and the growth of evil in the east, King Tarandor moved his noble house, where it was situated, from Osgiliath to Minas Anur, which we know better as Minas Tirith, which means that Osgiliath was no longer the political or even cultural capital of Gondor anymore. In fact, they moved it to what was the new economic centre of the kingdom, and a place that was far safer. But we also know that the watch on the borders of Mordor ceased, and the fortresses that guarded the passes were unmanned. The Great Plague was so devastating that they had to abandon the guard on Mordor, and this would leave Osgiliath open to attack when you look at how close it is to Mordor. But it was also because Gondor was still under pressure from the descendants of Castamere, who you'll remember from the Kinstrife, the Gondorian Civil War. These are actually the Umbar that we can see in the extended edition of The Return of the King. Osgiliath had naturally become a lot more costly and harder to defend. It was split across the River Anduin in two halves. From all of these things, Osgiliath had declined culturally, politically, and militarily. But its total ruin hasn't happened yet. It hasn't been reduced to kind of the rubble and ruin that we find it in the War of the Ring. No, that happened in the year 2475 of the Third Age, when the race of Uruks, black orcs of great strength, first appeared out of Mordor, and in 2475 they swept across Ithilien and took Osgiliath. Boromir, son of Denethor, after whom Boromir of the Nine Walkers was later named, defeated them and regained Ithilien, but Osgiliath was finally ruined, and its great stone bridge was broken. To be clear, this is a different Boromir to...
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
And a different Denethor to...
Abandon your post!
Though it is interesting that Osgiliath was attacked by Uruks, Tolkien doesn't usually use that term to describe Sauron's forces. We mostly know it from Saruman's steroid-induced juggernauts. Either way, the great stone bridge of Osgiliath was broken and no more people dwelt there afterwards, truly spelling the end for the city. And this bridge is important. It's one of the few features of the city that are regularly described. It's described as a great bridge upon which there were towers and houses of stone wonderful to behold. Now we do learn in The Return of the King that they actually went back and rebuilt a bridge in Osgiliath, but it wasn't, rebuilding this magnificent bridge. It was just a rudimentary bridge designed to help them get troops across so they could defend the eastern half of the city. The landmark that truly defined Osgiliath was gone. Though of course it did remain strategically important, especially throughout the War of the Ring. After all, having a giant river between you and your enemy is remarkably helpful, so they kept it mostly as a defensive position, though it is worthy of note that during Denethor II's reign they actually also held most of the eastern half of the city. It was disputed territory though, which means that as skirmishes went back and forth, more of the city would get destroyed, meaning the western half is probably in a better condition than the eastern half ever was. But then finally, the year 3018 came and the War of the Ring began, with the invasion of Osgiliath. This invasion sparked the War of the Ring. It's noted that sudden war came upon us out of Mordor, and we were swept away. We were outnumbered. Only a remnant of our eastern force came back, destroying the last bridge that stood there amidst the ruins of Osgiliath. They destroyed the last bridge connecting the two halves of the city to prevent Sauron easily crossing to the western half, and with that, they conceded the eastern half of the city to him. Now, Sauron took the eastern half of Osgiliath so that he could cut Gondor off and begin his hunt for the ring. And it largely worked. Osgiliath was split and the western half was reduced to a poorly defended garrison that would be slowly bombarded with catapults into ruin. Over its history, Osgiliath slowly lost its population, its political power, and with that, its culture and its stature, destroyed by civil war, plague, and invasion. But that's all from me. My question for you today is, what is your favourite landmark in your city? A statue or a place that you like to go? Let me know down in the comments below. I just rhymed. Also, you're probably not going to care about this, but I am so excited because I just got them. Look at these amazing art books that I got for The Legend of Korra and The Last Airbender. Finally bought them. They're amazing. But until next time, I'd love you to come follow me over on Twitter or Facebook or email stuff that you made, address and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, Subfuries, and I'll see you in the future.